wasn't the virus. I wore the face mask because I didn't want to talk to anybody. It was my first Father's Day since my dad died. And I was flying to California for his funeral. He was 94, good run, but there was still a heft of grief on my shoulders. It was also the 5th anniversary of my wife's passing, which brought an equally weighty but very different sadness. With that much heartache lodged in my throat, talking, too daunting. I put on a ball cap, pulled it way down on my forehead so all anybody could see was my eyes. So I drove to the airport with a small black cloud over my head, not wanting to be in the crowds. I did everything I could to make the trip easy on myself. I got there early, so any problems with traffic, parking, TSA, or other issues didn't become overwhelming. Left me calmer, let me be silently courteous instead of rudely competitive with everybody else wending their way through the airport. At the gate, I waited quietly at the front of the queue for my boarding group because we were just going to be sitting for the next 2 hours. I also reserved the aisle seat on the emergency exit row because, well, I'm a big guy and I really enjoy the legroom at that spot. The first initial indication of turmoil to come came while waiting to board. A couple whose connection had been canceled had rebooked onto our flight, and they were noisily complaining at the counter because they had had first-class seats on their canceled connection, and on our flight, first class was full. With apologies to fans of Gilligan's Island, we'll call this couple Mr. and Mrs. Howell, partly for their matching Louis Vuitton carry-on bags, but mostly for their very entitled attitude. The Howells, of course, went to the very front of the first-class queue and boarded the plane before anyone else. When I boarded, I noted they were in my emergency exit row, but on the other side of the plane with Mr. Howell at the window seat and Mrs. Howell in the middle seat. Fine. A Chinese gentleman sat down in the aisle seat next to Mrs. Howell, and any hope of a tranquil flight vanished. She began complaining about his size obnoxiously. Now, this gentleman, Chinese gentleman, was not obese. If he was female, I would have described him as a little bit more than Rubenesque, so we'll call him Ruben. And it was a hot day, so Ruben had on a short sleeve shirt and shorts, so yeah, plenty of flesh. But Ruben was nothing unusual for the emergency exit row. We big and tall people cluster there for a reason. Mrs. Howell was yelling at him, telling Ruben he should have gotten 2 seats. And Ruben was explaining he didn't have to. But she was unrelenting. She gets up and Mrs. Howell worms her way up through the crowded aisle to the front of the plane and the flight attendants and was complaining about having a largest Chinese gentleman seated next to her. From my seat, I could see the flight crew was unsympathetic. Ms. Howell returns, and she continues to loudly fat shame Ruben, who isn't taking it well at all. People on the plane are shouting at Mrs. Howell to shut up. It's only a 2-hour flight, but she just goes on and on. Phones are being pulled from purses and pockets to video this spectacle. I've had enough. I quietly ask Ruben if he wants to swap seat. He agrees. As I settle into my seat, Mrs. Howell leans over and gushes, "Thank you." I don't say anything. I don't want to talk. I don't want to escalate. I just stare at her. Remember, I've got the face mask on and the ball cap pulled down, so all you can see is my eyes. With my stare alone, I'm trying to tell her she's the problem, not Ruben. that everybody on this plane is upset at her actions. And I'm having a terrible day and her antics aren't helping, so please sit down and shut up. I guess it worked because she did. Not a word from either of the Howells the entire flight. After takeoff, I unexpectedly decide to chat with Ruben. Nice guy, originally from Taiwan. He is traveling on business, working in the aftermarket auto parts industry. We commiserate on supply chains. I noticed the woman sitting next to him now on his side of the plane is nonchalant about her larger seat companion. Afterwards, at the baggage carousel, Ruben thanks me and leaves me with a big smile underneath my face mask. I wish I had told him that my late wife was Chinese and a largish person. And whenever we flew, she and I, we sat in those 2 aisle seats in the emergency exit row. Thank you.